Prepare for a case where nothing is what it seems, and danger walks only one step behind the truth. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the Day They Dragged Saul Away. The knock that came at 2:14 that afternoon didn't just announce itself. It arrived like a debt collector with a grudge and the arm to back it up. I was halfway through typing a note for Wolfe about a client who'd tried to short the bill when the sound hit the door with the kind of unhappy authority that told me the person on the other side either carried a badge or wished he did. I saved the note, pushed back from the desk, and went to see what sort of misery had decided to pay us a visit before Wolfe's orchid session ended. When I yanked the door open, I got the full view of Pearly Stebbins standing on the stoop like a monument to bad weather. His coat was soaked enough to qualify as maritime salvage, and his bulldog jaw was clenched tight enough to crack walnuts. Behind him, 2 uniforms loomed, trying to look as if this were a social call. They failed. What really made my stomach hit the basement wasn't who was there, it was who wasn't. If Pearly showed up with that expression and no Saul Panzer in tow, we were in trouble of a variety I didn't care for. Pearly didn't waste syllables. "Goodwin," he grunted, voice carrying the tone of a man who wished someone else had drawn the assignment. "We got Saul Panzer in custody." That sentence didn't so much land as detonate. For a second I forgot to breathe, which is rare for me because I enjoy the pastime. Saul Panzer, ace operative, quiet genius, observant as a cat in a mouse factory, would no sooner commit armed robbery than Wolfe would take a moonlit stroll. I managed to swallow. "You want to run that again? Maybe in English or whatever language passes for it at the precinct?" Pearly's eyes narrowed, but not with hostility, more like exhaustion wrapped in duty. "He's at the station. Suspicion of armed robbery at a midtown brokerage. 1 victim dead." He added it flat, as if stating the weather. I let out a low whistle. "Well, that's an impressive pile of nonsense. Who wrote it? A dramatist or one of your rookies trying creative fiction?" One of the uniforms grunted, ready to try showing me the error of my ways in a more physical form, but Pearly shot him a look that stopped him cold. "You done yapping, Goodwin? I need to see Wolfe." "You need a bath," I said pleasantly, "but we can compromise and let you in." I stepped aside, and the trio filed past like a miserable parade. Even Fritz, emerging from the dining room doorway with a spoon in hand, took one look at Pearly's dripping coat and silently retreated. He had soup on the stove, and no intention of sharing his kitchen floor with a puddle the size of Lake Michigan. I led them to the office where Wolfe sat at his desk, the room thick with the kind of late afternoon heat that makes dust motes look dramatic. Wolfe was reading a book on medieval culinary customs, which meant he was either hungry, irritated, or bored. When he heard Saul's name, he rose a full inch in his chair, practically a somersault by Wolfian standards. "Mr. Stebbins," Wolfe said with a gravity that could give marble a complex. "Explain yourself." Pearly held out a folder like it weighed 50 pounds. "Inspector Kramer said you should be notified. Panzer was picked up 2 hours ago. Evidence suggests involvement." I intercepted the folder before Wolfe could reach for it. "You hear that, sir? Evidence suggests involvement. They must have found a clue in a fortune cookie." Pearly bristled. "Watch it, Goodwin. The prints on the paperweight match Panzer's, and there's a broker's card with his handwriting." "Pfui," Wolfe murmured, the word escaping like a sigh of contempt. He motioned with 2 fingers, and I handed him the folder. Wolfe skimmed the top sheet without haste, then closed it. "Mr. Stebbins, Saul Panzer is no felon. The suggestion is offensive, and the reasoning laughable." "That's for the DA to decide," Pearly said, but his voice lacked heat. Even he didn't believe it. I leaned back on the edge of Wolfe's desk, arms crossed. "Tell me, Pearly, did any of your boys consider the possibility that the evidence was planted? Or is that too new a concept for the NYPD curriculum?" One of the uniforms started forward. Pearly raised a hand without looking. "Knock it off, Goodwin, this isn't a joke." "Neither is arresting Saul," I shot back. Wolfe cleared his throat, a sound equal to a gavel. "Archie." Just my name, but packed with both rebuke and something softer, concern tempered with formality. He didn't want me picking a fight, even if I was justified. Pearly sighed. "Look, it's procedure. Kramer figured you'd raise hell if you weren't informed. That's the only reason I'm here instead of at lunch." Wolfe's voice chilled. "If Inspector Kramer ordered that, then he retains a measure of common sense. You will convey my appreciation." Pearlie blinked, unsure whether he'd been insulted or thanked. "Fine, but we need Panzer's movements from yesterday. If you have anything that can clear him, now's the time." Wolfe shut his eyes briefly, thinking. "I have nothing yet, but I will. Archie, see Mr. Stebbins out." Pearlie frowned. "We're not done." "Yes, you are," I said, opening the door. "You delivered your thunderbolt. Now let us pick up the pieces." He trudged out, the uniforms behind him. On the stoop, he paused. "Goodwin, it doesn't look good. Tell Wolfe the DA's pushing fast." I nodded once. "We'll move faster." When I closed the door and returned to the office, Wolfe was glowering at the folder like it had insulted his ancestry. "Archie," he said, "Saul Panzer is incapable of this crime." "Agreed." "Then we proceed. Bring me the facts." I sat opposite him. Pearlie said they found a torn broker's card with Saul's handwriting on it. "Want to hazard a guess whether it's real?" "No." Wolfe tapped his fingertips together. "I want to see it." He paged through the file again, eyes narrowing at the photostat. "The handwriting is Saul's, but this stroke, here, is inconsistent with natural motion." "Meaning forged?" I prompted. "Meaning," Wolfe said, "someone trained enough to imitate, but not enough to comprehend." His lip curled. "This is amateur work." "Well, amateurs can kill too." He shot me a glare that meant, "Not now, Archie." I rose and paced, hands in pockets. Pearlie said robbery, but I don't see Saul sticking up a midtown brokerage. He doesn't even raise his voice at a cabbie. Wolfe tapped the desk bell, and Fritz appeared silently at the doorway. If I didn't know better, I'd swear he materialized. "Yes, sir?" "Beer," Wolfe ordered, "and one for Mr. Goodwin." He paused. "He requires it." Fritz nodded and vanished. That was Wolfe's version of putting a hand on my shoulder. I returned to the desk. "What's the plan?" Wolfe drummed his fingers. "You will speak to Inspector Kramer as soon as he is available. Inform him that I require access to Saul." He shifted in his chair, discomfort disguised as irritation. "Archie, if Saul is harmed—" "He won't be," I said. "You know Pearlie. He may look like he chews dynamite for breakfast, but he's fair." Wolfe grunted. "Fairness is insufficient." He leaned back. "I need data, names, times, motives. You will begin immediately." Fritz returned with the beer on a tray, glasses frosted and gleaming. According to the clock, it was comfortably afternoon, so Wolfe's conscience wouldn't shrivel. I took mine and drank deep. It didn't solve anything, but it made the next 5 minutes more tolerable. Wolfe sipped his, then set it down. "This involves a brokerage firm, finance, a domain of treachery and duplicity. I dislike it already." "You dislike anything that requires you to think about walking more than 6 feet," I said. He ignored that. "You will acquire the victim's identity, the firm's partners, its clients, and its enemies." "That's a long list." "Yes, and yet manageable when handled by someone who insists on being indispensable." I saluted him with the glass. "There's my daily compliment. I'll cherish it." He frowned, tugged the bell cord again. Not for Fritz this time, but because he needed the punctuation. "Archie, go." I made for the door, grabbing my coat from the rack. As I opened it, Wolfe called after me, "Archie?" I turned. His expression held something that looked suspiciously like worry wearing a scowl. "Take care, this matter has an odour." I grinned. "Everything has an odour to you." "Archie," sharper now. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll watch it." He nodded once. I stepped into the hall, letting the door close behind me. The brownstone hummed with heat and tension, and Saul Panzer, our Saul, was sitting in a cell somewhere counting ceiling cracks. Whatever had dragged him into a world of brokerage offices and bloodshed was going to regret it before long. Because if there's one universal fact in New York, it's this: you don't frame a friend of Nero Wolfe and get away with it. The smell hit me before the door even opened all the way. A sour cocktail of panic, stale scotch, and the kind of sweat that comes from a man realizing too late that he should have skipped town yesterday. I've walked into plenty of bad rooms in my day, but Chet Brill's apartment had the particular ambience of a nightmare in a necktie. Boxes half-packed, drawers yanked open, papers scattered like confetti after a parade no one enjoyed. Pearlie Stebbins stood in the middle of it all, arms crossed, jaw set, giving me the look a bouncer gives the guy who's already been tossed out twice. "Goodwin," he grunted as I stepped inside. "Watch your step." "I always do," I said. "Except around the NYPD, but that's more of a tradition than a mistake." He didn't rise to it. Something in the room had scraped the humour out of him. On the floor near the kitchen was Chet Brill, what was left of him, lying sideways with his head at an angle that nature never sanctioned. There was a glass on the counter, still smelling of scotch, and the suitcase beside him held a pathetic assortment of shirts and socks that suggested Chet packed for speed, not dignity. But none of that was what got my blood moving. What got me was what sat neatly on the bedspread, displayed like an exhibit in an assassination museum, Saul Panzer's flat cap. If Saul ever left that cap behind, the world would be ending with trumpets and floodwaters. I stepped closer and picked it up with 2 fingers, held it to the light. No dust, no smudges, no wear on the brim. Brand new. A plant so blatant even a rookie desk sergeant could have guessed it. "Pearlie," I said quietly, "if the building was on fire and the devil himself was hauling him out by the ear, Saul still wouldn't leave this behind." Stebbins' mouth twitched. "You think I don't know that? But someone wanted it found. And Brill, well, you see it." I did. Brill had been running scared, probably since the last time I rattled him about the second ledger. Panic makes people sloppy, and sloppy people become victims when sharks smell blood. A rattle came from the hallway, the kind of high-heeled, dramatic arrival that belongs in a theatre, not a homicide scene. Vera Kelleher swept in wearing a coat too expensive for grief and an expression too carefully arranged for sincerity. She pressed a hand to her throat. "Oh, Mr. Goodwin. Sergeant, I came as soon as I heard." I murmured, "News travels fast when there's a scandal involved." She ignored that. Her gaze landed on Saul's cap, and for one fraction of a second a flicker crossed her eyes. Relief? Victory? Recognition? Hard to tell. Vera was a woman with enough control to pass a polygraph while committing tax fraud. A moment later, Milton Cass appeared behind her, equally punctual, equally smoothed over. "My God," he breathed, surveying the room. "Chet, too?" Stebbins turned on him. "You knew him well." Cass spread his hands. "We worked together daily. He was ambitious." "He was scared out of his skin," I said, right up until someone relieved him of the burden. Cass's jaw tightened, but his composure held, exactly the right amount of surprise, untainted by guilt or panic. Too practiced, too tidy. It made my skin itch. People don't get murdered minutes after panic packing unless they know something worth killing for. And Cass's eyes scanned the scene like a man checking whether the rug covered the stain completely. Before I could needle him further, the door banged again and in came Inspector Kramer, trench coat flapping, cigar clamped in his teeth like a lifeline. His sighs filled the room instantly. "Goodwin," he barked, "tell me why I had to hear about this from Stebbins instead of you." "Inspector," I said pleasantly, "you looked busy. I didn't want to disturb you while you were building the world's fastest wrongful indictment." He puffed a cloud of smoke large enough to suffocate a choir. "You're hilarious. Now start talking." I spread my arms. Brill was packing. Someone didn't like that. And someone left a cute party favour to make sure we all think Saul swung by for dessert. Kramer's eyes locked instantly on the cap. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. If Panzer was here, he wasn't, I snapped. Unless he started breaking into apartments, killing co-workers and leaving calling cards like a deranged Girl Scout, which I doubt. Stebbins cut in. "Boss, the cap looks wrong." Kramer snapped. "Everything about this case looks wrong." He turned to me, eyes sharp. "Goodwin, anyone see you pick that up?" "Just the wallpaper and Pearlie's better senses." "Put it down. We'll get the labs on it." I set it carefully back on the bed, resisting the urge to dust my hands theatrically. Kramer stepped close. "Goodwin, listen. I'm under pressure from every direction, the DA, the press, my own commissioner. If Panzer's innocent, I need facts, not sarcasm." "Then try solving it before someone plants a smoking gun in Wolfe's greenhouse," I said. "Just a suggestion." He didn't even glare that time. He just sighed. "You're not helping." "That's debatable." Cass cleared his throat. "Inspector, if you no longer need me—" "No, Mr. Cass," Kramer said. "I need you at the precinct later. Don't vanish." Cass nodded stiffly and exited with the widow close behind, each pretending not to walk together when in fact they moved like 2 magnets locked under a tablecloth. When they were gone, Stebbins knelt beside Brill's suitcase. He was getting out fast. He held up a shirt still folded, tag attached. New. Runs in the firm, I said. Lots of fresh starts, none of them successful. Kramer rubbed his temple. This changes the picture. It improves it, I said. For whoever framed Saul, now they've got 2 bodies and 1 scapegoat. Unless Brill was working with Panzer. I snorted so hard it startled the room. Brill and Saul in the same conspiracy? That's a red herring even the widow wouldn't try to serve. Kramer didn't disagree. 15 minutes later, my statement taken, my patience tested, and my optimism murdered alongside Brill, I headed back to the brownstone. The winter sky had deepened into a bruise-coloured haze, and the city felt like a machine grinding in the wrong gear. Inside, Wolfe sat exactly as I'd left him, behind his desk, solid, immovable, radiating disapproval at the universe. "Well?" he demanded. I dropped into my chair. "We've got a second body, Brill," Wolfe inhaled sharply. For him, that counted as shouting. "Explain." I laid it out. The packing, the panic, the cap. His eyes narrowed to slits, the expression of a man constructing a theory from matchsticks and dynamite. "Archie," he said quietly, "desist from endangering yourself unnecessarily." I grinned. "I'd consider it, but it's arguably my best quality." He scowled, meaning he was relieved. "What does this accomplish?" he muttered. "To kill Brill." "He knew something," I said, "or saw something, or said something to the wrong person. Maybe the ledger, maybe Cass, maybe the widow." Wolfe tapped his desk, once, twice, loud enough to echo. "We are dealing with someone who requires control, a personality that cannot abide unpredictability. That type kills not out of impulse but out of necessity." "Someone with a brain," I said. "A planner." "Yes, using pawns. Saul was one, Brill another." He closed his eyes. "This is no mere attempt to deflect suspicion from financial fraud. It is an orchestration of vengeance or fear of exposure." He opened his eyes. "Or both." "I'd vote for both," I said. "The firm smells like a nest of vipers." Wolfe leaned back. "And the ledger?" "It exists," I said. "Brill forgot to hide his panic. He knew something worth killing for." Wolfe exhaled. "Find it." "And if someone kills me next?" I asked lightly. "Pfui," he said. "You are exasperatingly durable." Fritz appeared in the doorway. "Dinner will be at 8, Mr. Wolfe." That was the ritual. The world could collapse, but dinner remained fixed. The only thing stronger than murder was Fritz's sense of schedule. Wolfe nodded. "Archie, until dinner, work." I stood, grabbed my coat, and headed for the hall. Behind me, Wolfe added, softer, "And Archie, caution." That was Wolfe at his most protective, which meant the case had crossed a line. Brill was dead. Saul was framed. The ledger was real. And the killer had just declared war. There's a special kind of silence that hangs in an empty accounting office after business hours, the kind that smells faintly of ink, fear, and the realization that numbers don't lie, but people who push them around do it as a full-time hobby. Howard Jantz's office had all 3 in stock. The overhead light flickered just enough to annoy but not enough to die, and the man himself sat hunched behind a desk, buried in ledgers like a squirrel in a pile of nuts it had no intention of sharing. Jantzer looked up when I entered, and his eyes did the same jittery dance as a man trying to memorize the exits in a burning building. He was balding, pale, and sweating lightly despite the cold outside, a classic accountant's complexion. "Mr. Goodwin," he stammered, I didn't expect... Well, I wasn't told." "That's the whole idea," I said. "Surprise visits are more educational. People tell the truth before they remember to invent something prettier." He dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief that matched his expression, wrinkled and worried. "You're here about Mr. Kellerman." "Partially," I said, settling into the chair opposite him. "But mostly I'm here about the kind of bookkeeping that doesn't make it into the annual reports. I hear there's a shadow ledger floating around. A second set of books, to be precise." He swallowed so hard I heard it. Who? Who told you that?" "A little bird," I said. "One that sings off key unless someone threatens to wring its neck." Jantz's fingers tightened on the armrests. "Mr. Goodwin, this is..." "Howard," I said gently. "I work for Nero Wolfe. You may have heard of him. Large man, larger vocabulary, hates dishonesty and exercise in equal measure. He suggested I might need to subpoena your childhood report cards to check for early signs of deception. That did it. He squeaked, a sound I still can't categorize, and leaned forward. Please, you don't need to do that. You want to know about the ledger? Fine, fine. He wiped both hands down his face. There was, a second ledger, not kept here, not on the premises. Where? He hesitated, glancing at the closed office door like he expected Cass or the widow or the Grim Reaper to kick it down any moment. In a safety deposit box, under someone's name. The widow's? No. His voice cracked. Not hers. He didn't elaborate, but the terror in his eyes said enough. Whoever the name belonged to, they weren't the type to let witnesses walk around breathing freely. What did the victim know about it? I asked. Janse lowered his voice to a whisper. Everything. He discovered things he shouldn't have. Irregular trades, false entries, money routed through dummy accounts. He confronted someone, I don't know who, but he was scared. I saw him the day before he died. He said it was only a matter of time before someone balanced the books. That's a cheery phrase, I muttered. I thought he meant a reprimand. I didn't think... His voice broke. Someone came to see me last night. I don't know who. They stood in the hallway with their face shadowed. They said if I talked... He pressed a trembling hand to his mouth. I leaned in. Howard, if someone threatened you, that means you're important. And important people get protected, by us or by the NYPD. But if you hide things, you're going to wind up like Brill. And you've seen how he ended up. His eyes flooded with panic. Please don't let them kill me. That's the plan, I said. So tell me something useful. Whose name is on that box? He closed his eyes. A woman's name, but not Mrs. Kelleher. Someone else. A red herring wandered across my mind. Maybe a mistress, maybe a decoy. But Janse's fear was too real to ignore. I filed the lead away like a freshly sharpened knife. I left him with instructions to stay in well-lit places and avoid suspicious characters. Given that this building was filled with them, he was doomed. From there I headed to a quiet bar on West 46th, the kind with murky lighting, a cracked mirror behind the counter, and a bartender who watched humanity the way a hawk watches mice. Lon Cohen sat in a booth near the back, nursing a seltzer and scribbling notes. When he saw me, he made a face usually reserved for bills arriving during the holidays. Archie, he said, if you're here to complain about the paper, save it. The Gazette is going to run the story. Saul Panzer, from sleuth to suspect. Big headline, 2 columns. I slid into the booth. Lon, if you run that headline, I'll personally come down there and rearrange your type trays. He snorted. You're welcome to try, but the boss wants blood. Saul's a name people recognize, and murders sell papers. Then sell something else, I said. Look, Saul Panzer is cleaner than a hospital in Switzerland. You put that headline out, and you'll poison half the jury pool. Lon shook his head. I can delay it, maybe. If Wolfe gives me something in return, a quote, a tip, a denial, anything. Print this, I said. Wolfe is cooperating fully, but premature speculation will hinder the course of justice. Lon scribbled. That's not much. Add that Wolfe once threw a man out for chewing gum too loudly, I suggested. Readers love colourful details. Lon snickered. Fine. I'll hold the headline till tomorrow morning. But after that, Goodwin, my hands are tied. Tie them looser, I said, but we both knew he wouldn't. I headed back to the brownstone, arriving at 4:12, dangerously close to Orchid time. Wolfe sat at his desk, monumental as ever. When I entered, he raised one eyebrow, which in Wolfe's language translates to, "You had better have something, or I shall consider the day wasted." Cass's accountant, I reported. Janse. He says the victim found inside a tray dirt Cass wanted buried, and there's a safety deposit box with the ghost ledger, under a woman's name. Wolfe grunted. Unsatisfactory. It gets better. Someone threatened Janse last night. Expected. And the Gazette's prepping a headline that'll turn Saul into public enemy number 2. Wolfe's nostrils flared. Archie. Relax. I stalled it. He tugged the bell cord. Call Cass's attorney. I dialed. It rang 5 times before a brittle voice answered. Ferguson, legal counsel. Wolfe took the phone with the air of a man accepting tribute. This is Nero Wolfe, he said. I require clarity regarding your client's off-book accounts. There was a choking sound. Mr. Wolfe, I'm afraid I can't. You will, Wolfe said, voice smooth as brick. Or I will pursue civil remedies so severe your grandchildren will feel the strain. Sir, I don't... Mr. Ferguson, Cass's irregularities are now a matter of life, death, and legal discovery. You will disclose the truth or be dragged through it. I watched the attorney crumble through the receiver. Within 30 seconds, he admitted Cass had unauthorized accounts the firm never approved. Wolfe ended the call with a click that sounded like judgment incarnate. Your levity is ill-timed, Archie, he said, though not entirely unwelcome. I blinked. I didn't say anything. You were about to. He waved me off as if dismissing a schoolboy caught chewing gum. Then he motioned to the typed payoff note lying on his blotter. You recall the spacing flaw? Yes. It matches Cass's office typewriter precisely. Lovely, I said. Shall I fetch the manacles? The phone rang. I picked up. Wolfe's residence, Goodwin speaking. Kramer's voice came through tight and raw. Goodwin, put him on. I handed the phone to Wolfe, who glared at it like it had personally offended him. Yes. Wolfe, Kramer growled. The DA is done waiting. He wants the indictment tonight. Wolfe's tone froze the air. Then we must accelerate faster, Kramer exhaled. I'll give you hours, no more. The line went dead. Wolfe placed the phone down softly, the way a man lowers the lid of a coffin. Archie, he said, summon the truth. I stood. Where should I look? His eyes glinted. Everywhere our adversary thinks we won't. And that was Wolfe's version of a marching order. It also meant the night was about to get considerably more dangerous. Saul's freedom, and someone else's downfall, was now a matter of speed, wit, and a ledger hidden under a stranger's name. And if I didn't find it fast, the NYPD would close the book with Saul's fingerprints all over the cover. You can learn a lot about a frame-up by retracing the steps of the person who built it, the same way you learn about a carpenter by the nails he leaves lying around. Midtown still had the jittery pulse of late afternoon, the kind that made office windows glow like a row of Cyclops' eyes and left the cold air smelling faintly of wet concrete and fried optimism. I had my notebook out, my collar turned up, and a determination to untangle the mess someone had wrapped around Saul Panzer like a poisoned Christmas ribbon. The building superintendent of Saul's place was a barrel-chested fellow named Mr. Hensley, who spoke slowly and moved quickly, never a reassuring combination. He met me in the dim hallway outside Saul's apartment, keys jangling on a ring big enough to double as a medieval weapon. Mr. Panzer ain't in trouble, is he? Hensley muttered. Only the kind the police specialize in, I said. I'm trying to unspecialize it. He rubbed the back of his neck. He's a quiet one, polite, pays on time, never bothers nobody. That's Saul, I said. A man so discreet he leaves less wake than a canoe. Hensley nodded. Thing is, there was a woman asked for him. Few days ago. I paused. Describe her. He squinted at the floor as if the details were printed there. Tall, dark hair, fancy coat, sort of elegant but cold, you know. She stood there asking if Mr. Panzer was home, said she had an appointment. Appointment, sure. The same kind of appointment a hangman has with a prisoner. Did you see her face clearly? I asked. Not exactly. She kept the collar up, but her silhouette, long, thin. She moved like someone who's used to walking into rooms and getting her way. I didn't have to guess long. Vera Kelleher's outline could cast shadows across a man's conscience. And she touched the wall here, Hensley added, pointing to the hallway radiator. Pressed her hand on it. Don't know why. Odd thing to do. It wasn't odd. It was methodical. You leave fingerprints where the target will touch. You lift theirs from something innocent, and then you mix the two like a baker blending flour. The paperweight at the brokerage had Saul's prints, and a glass from his hallway could have supplied them. Mr. Goodwin, Hensley said nervously. Mr. Panzer, he didn't do anything, did he? He did something, I said. He trusted the wrong people. Hensley swallowed and fidgeted with his keys. A red herring appeared in my mind. Maybe the woman wasn't the widow. Maybe it was someone posing as her. But the gesture, the cold elegance lined up too neatly to dismiss. I thanked him and left, my brain running diagrams like a chalkboard. Saul had been tailed, impersonated, and his identity mined like a gold vein. Someone collected. His fingerprints, his hat, his handwriting, his habits, his proximity to the brokerage, and they assembled them into one tidy package for the NYPD. I walked the block around Saul's building, tracing the path the killer would have taken. The payphone where the victim got his final call stood under a flickering streetlight. A woman could have used it without attracting attention. Women didn't make anonymous threats in those days, at least not publicly. Men underestimated them. Men got killed for underestimating them. As I headed back to the brownstone, the snow began drifting lightly, dusting the sidewalks like a new layer of lies. I climbed the stoop, stepped inside, and found Wolfe in the office with the gravity of a man reading the obituary of someone he disliked but respected. He didn't look up. "Archie, report." I dropped into my chair. The frame is tighter than Fritz's pantry. Saul's fingerprints were lifted from a glass in his hallway. Someone impersonated him, tailed him, and planted his cap and handwriting. The super saw a woman matching Vera's build. Wolfe's eyelids lowered halfway, the closest he gets to blinking in surprise. A woman asking for Saul. "Not asking," I said, "scouting." Wolfe tapped a finger on the desk. The killer needed several components: print evidence, handwriting, a garment, a plausible motive, and a means to connect him to the victim. They have all. "Except the ledger," I said. He sighed. "The ledger is merely the fulcrum. The identity of the thief, and thus the murderer, is the lever." I leaned back. "Wolfe, if this keeps up, I might have to print a brochure titled How to Frame a Detective, a Beginner's Guide. Chapter 1, Steal His Hat." "Archie," he said sternly, "levity does not mitigate peril." "It helps me cope," I said. "In that case," he said dryly, "continue, but do not lose accuracy." He pushed back in his chair, eyes narrowing in thought, and began assembling the pieces aloud. Not for me, not even for himself, but as a kind of ritualistic internal monologue that only I got to hear. "First," he said, "they needed Mr. Panzer's fingerprints, obtained easily enough by someone with access to his building. Second, his hat, either stolen or replicated. Third, handwriting, which Mr. Panzer's clients may hold. Fourth, a narrative connecting him to the victim, a previous assignment linking him to Mr. Cass. Fifth, a ledger worth killing for." He paused. "This is identity theft of the most pernicious kind. Within finance, identity is currency. They stole his." I grinned. "At least they didn't steal mine. Too much upkeep." He shot me a look. "Archie." I know. I held up a hand. "But you can admit it. This frame job is high-grade craftsmanship." "It is vulgar," Wolfe said crisply. "Sloppy in its ambition, yet dangerous in execution." A sharp knock cut through the air. Before I could answer it, the door swung open just enough for Inspector Kramer to push his way in, bringing with him a cloud of cigar smoke that would have earned a citation in any other borough. "Wolfe," he growled, "we need to talk." "You may, Inspector," Wolfe said, not rising. "Whether I listen is my prerogative." Kramer snorted. "I've had a day that'd make a preacher cuss." The widow hired a high-priced criminal lawyer, one of those Fifth Avenue types who charges more per minute than a cabbie on New Year's Eve. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "One hires artillery only when expecting bombardment." Kramer paced. "Also, Goodwin, that payphone lead you gave us. You were right. It was staged. Timestamps don't match. The operator logs are off. Someone called that phone afterward to fake the time window." "Glad we're keeping the score even," I said. "I'll embroider it on a pillow." Kramer shot me a look but didn't snap. Respect. He was down to threads, but the threads were holding. He turned back to Wolfe. "You have anything for me? Because the DA is sharpening a knife the size of the Chrysler Building." "Patience," Wolfe said. "Truth accumulates." "That's not good enough," Kramer replied. "Saul Panzer is sitting in custody. He's your man, and like it or not, he's mine now too. I need to know if he's being railroaded." "He is," Wolfe said flatly, "but not by the police." Kramer's jaw twitched. "By who?" "That," Wolfe said calmly, "is what I intend to discover before the evening is over." Kramer studied him for a long moment. "All right," he muttered. "I'll wait for your report." It was his version of a bow. Then he left, shutting the door gently. Another rarity. When he was gone, Wolfe's hand drifted toward the bell cord, then stopped. Not good. That meant he was too agitated to summon Fritz for dinner preparations, which was a bad sign for humanity as a whole. "You're skipping dinner?" I asked. He exhaled heavily. "I cannot eat while injustice to one of mine persists." I blinked. Wolfe refusing dinner was like a banker refusing profit. It didn't happen unless something in the world had gone profoundly wrong. That's when it hit me. Proving Saul innocent wasn't the hinge. Proving who needed him guilty, that was where the key turned. Someone wanted Saul out of the way, silenced, framed, sacrificed. The question wasn't who hated Saul. The question was who feared him, and that was a much smaller pool. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, mind racing so hard I could hear it over the radiator. "Archie," he said without opening them, "prepare. Tonight will be decisive." And I felt it too. The pressure, the stakes, the sense that we were one clue away from blowing the whole financial masquerade apart. Whoever built the frame around Saul had done it meticulously. Now it was our turn to light the edges on fire. The kind of news Ori Cather brings usually arrives with a smirk and an invoice, but that afternoon he came into the brownstone looking like a kid who'd just found the prize at the bottom of the cereal box and wasn't sure whether it was candy or dynamite. I was at my desk reading the evening edition, carefully avoiding the parts where the Gazette implied Saul Panzer might be the second coming of Dillinger, when Ori strode in, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Got it," he announced, tapping his fingers on Wolfe's desk as if summoning a genie, "the safety deposit box owner." Wolfe, who'd been leaning back with the measured calm of a man contemplating the extinction of humanity, opened one eye. "Name." Ori grinned. "Vera Kelleher." Wolfe's eyebrow rose a quarter inch, his version of someone gasping and clutching pearls. "Not under that name," Ori continued. "Her maiden name, Vera Linscott. She used it for the rental. Opened it 2 years ago. Paid in cash every time." That was enough goosebumps to cover a Thanksgiving turkey. I stood. "So our mourning widow has a side hustle and a hidden identity." Ori shook his head. "Not hidden, just tucked away neatly, like a snake under a satin pillow." Wolfe gestured impatiently. "The contents." "A ledger," Ori said triumphantly. "Not just any ledger, the ledger. The ghost book, all the siphoning transactions from the brokerage, every dirty dime. And get this, half the entries are routed right back to her." "And the other half?" I asked. Ori tapped the desk again. "Straight to Milton Cass." Wolfe sat forward in his chair, which for him was the dramatic equivalent of swinging from a chandelier. "They were partners." "Partners," Ori said. "And lovers, if the hotel bills mean anything. They've been slicing money off the firm for years." "So the victim discovered it," I said. "And instead of congratulating him on his moral fortitude, they decided to kill him." "And book Saul for it," Ori added. Wolfe inhaled like the world smelled wrong. "Archie, we are now in possession of motive, means and design." "And enough fraud to wallpaper the Chrysler Building," I said. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. "Bring the ledger to me." Ori handed it over. Wolfe's thick fingers handled it delicately, as if reverence alone could extract truth. His lips tightened. "Archie, there is a typed entry here. See the spacing?" I took one look and whistled. "Same wonky spacing as the payoff note." "Cass typed it," Wolfe declared, "and likely forged the payoff note using the same machine." "So Cass and the Widow Forgery Club," I remarked. "Charming." "Archie," Wolfe said, "you will speak with Mrs. Kelleher." That wasn't a suggestion. It was an appointment with danger dressed in silk socks. The Penthouse Hotel bar was one of those joints where the lighting was low, the liquor was overpriced, and the clientele was the sort that believed morals were optional if you wore enough diamonds. Mirrors lined the walls, catching reflections at angles that made it impossible to tell who was watching whom. A jazz trio murmured tunes soft enough not to disturb the guilty consciences floating around the room. Vera Kelleher sat at the bar wearing a dress the colour of melted chocolate and a string of pearls that glowed like gilt on parade. She saw me approach and didn't bother acting surprised. That takes energy she preferred to spend plotting. "Mr. Goodwin," she purred, "come to console a grieving widow." "I didn't see much grief," I said. "Not at the brokerage, not today, not now." She sipped her drink, leaving a perfect crescent of lipstick on the rim. "I don't owe you displays of emotion." "No," I agreed. "But you owe someone an explanation." She tilted her head. "About what?" "Brill's panic," I said. "Funny thing, When I saw you at his apartment, you reacted before I told you he'd been scared. Very curious." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but the second was enough to crack the veneer. "You don't understand the atmosphere at that firm," she said coolly. "People were always nervous." "You knew he was panicking before the police told you," I repeated. "That's not typical widow knowledge, Mrs. Kelleher." She smiled thinly. "Widowhood offers certain insights." "That's the thing about liars," I said, leaning closer. "They trip over yesterday while chasing tomorrow." Her hand gripped her glass. "You're out of your depth." "No," I said. "You and Cass are." I stood and left. Staying risked one of us getting thrown out a window by hotel security, and I prefer to leave buildings voluntarily. Outside the hotel, a familiar, gravelly voice stopped me cold. "Goodwin." Kramer stepped from the shadows, trenchcoat pulled tight against the wind. His cigar glowed like a tiny sun of frustration. "Inspector," I said. "If you're here to frisk me, I'm flattered, but—" "Shut up," he muttered. "I followed the widow. She meets you. That tells me you know something." "I know plenty," I said. He eyed me. "If you can wrap this up, Goodwin, do it. We don't want Panzer on the books. Half the department's ready to mutiny." That was something rare, Kramer admitting concern without yelling. The man was wearing down, and it showed in the slump of his shoulders. "You'll get your wrap-up," I promised. "Delivered with ribbon," he grunted. "Just don't get in the way." As he moved off into the city haze, I wondered how many dead ends he'd trudged through today. The man had sand. I'd give him that. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe sat in the office, the ledger open in front of him like a confession waiting to be notarized. The warm hum of the radiator mixed with the faint scent of Fritz's culinary magic drifting from the kitchen, probably dinner preparations Wolfe had no intention of attending until we were done. I dropped into my chair. "The widow slipped," I said. "She knew Brill was already panicking before anyone told her." Wolfe nodded once. "As expected. And Kramer's ready to throw in the towel if we don't deliver soon." "He will persevere," Wolfe said. "He has a rigid sense of duty, irritating at times, but admirable." "That your way of saying you like him?" "Phooey," I grinned. Wolfe tapped the ledger. "Observe. Here, typed entries from 2 years ago. Then here, the payoff note, identical flaws. Cass typed it. Their scheme is incontrovertibly joint. Theft, fraud, murder, manipulation." "And framing Saul?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "because he is discreet, competent, and loyal, a formidable threat once aware of their misdeeds." "Meaning they needed him guilty," I said. "Not just out of the way, guilty." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "Precisely. Their plan required not merely murder, but misdirection. They needed the police to focus elsewhere. They exploited Saul's previous assignment involving Mr. Cass and arranged evidence around it." I nodded. "Classic shell game." "A vulgar analogy," Wolfe said, "but accurate." "What now?" I asked. He closed the ledger with slow precision. "Archie, summon them all." "The whole cast?" I asked. "Kelleher, Cass, Jantz, everybody?" "Yes, they will attend here, in this office." "That'll make Kramer happy," I said. "He loves when we host parties." Wolfe fixed me with a look. "Archie, do not arrive bruised. It would annoy me." I scooped up my coat. "I'll do my best, but if Cass takes a swing, I'll have to defend the agency's honor." Wolfe sniffed. "Keep your honor unblemished. We need it intact for the denouement." And just like that, the showdown was set. The ledger everyone wanted. The lovers who stole millions. The frame they built like a house of cards. And Nero Wolfe preparing to blow it down with one breath. Tomorrow night, the brownstone wouldn't just be a home. It would be a courtroom. The thing about turning Wolfe's office into a courtroom is that you don't need a gavel when you've already got Nero Wolfe and his bell cord. The only question is how many people you can cram into the room before the walls start filing complaints. At 8:32 that evening, we hit capacity. The radiator hissed, the street lamps outside cast yellow streaks across the curtains, and every chair that wasn't bolted down had been drafted into service for what I was privately calling the Brownstone Tribunal. Milton Cass sat stiffly in the red leather chair, hands clasped so tight the knuckles looked ready to mutiny. Beside him, Vera Kelleher, maiden name Linscott, widow name Liar, occupied the lame-o guest chair and made it look like a throne, back straight, chin high, pearls gleaming. Howard Jantz, our shivering accountant, took the far edge of the sofa, clutching his hat like a talisman that had already failed him twice. Pearlie Stebbins and Inspector Kramer stood near the door, human bookends, both in rumpled coats and the same brand of bad mood. And on the yellow chair by the wall, under the watchful eyes of one uniformed cop, sat Saul Panzer, pale but steady, wearing an expression that said he'd missed nothing and forgiven less. Wolfe, of course, reigned behind his desk, massive, immovable, and radiating displeasure at being forced to host humanity in bulk. Papers were stacked with military precision in front of him, photostats, the ledger, my notes typed earlier at his dictation. The desk lamp cut a sharp circle of light, leaving the edges of the room in just enough shadow to make everyone wonder how much Wolfe could see that they couldn't. Fritz made the last entrance, gliding in with a tray of coffee and cups, his face solemn enough to officiate a funeral. He set the tray on the side table with almost ceremonial care. For tonight, coffee was the only thing on offer. Dinner had been shoved to a hypothetical future in which justice existed and Wolfe's digestion wasn't under siege. "Sit down, Mr. Panzer," Wolfe said, his tone uncharacteristically gentle. "You are here under supervision, yes, but not as a defendant." Saul inclined his head. "I'm well aware who the defendants are," he said quietly. Cass flinched. Vera didn't. Kramer cleared his throat, the cigar in his fingers sending up a small storm cloud. "All right, Wolfe," he said. "You wanted them all here. They're here. Make this worth the trip." "It will be worth considerably more than that," Wolfe replied. "For some of you, it will be worth your freedom. For others—" He let it hang, like a noose dangling from an unseen beam. I stayed at my usual station off to one side, notebook open, pencil ready. If this circus needed a stenographer with opinions, I was elected. Wolfe laced his fingers over his middle. "We shall proceed," he announced. "First, Mr. Cass and Mrs. Kelleher. You have been engaged for some years in a clandestine partnership, both romantic and financial. You siphoned funds from Henshaw and Kellerman Investments through a series of off-book transactions, recorded in a private ledger kept in a safety deposit box under Mrs. Kelleher's maiden name." Cass's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous." Vera's brows rose. "If you accuse me of fraud, Mr. Wolfe, I trust you have more than atmospheric suspicion." I spoke up. "We do. Ori Cather retrieved the ledger from the bank. Your name's on the rental slip, Mrs. Linscott, and your handwriting decorates half the entries like a signature perfume." Wolfe flicked a glance at me, silent enough, then continued. "The ledger demonstrates a pattern of embezzlement. Funds were diverted from client accounts into two primary channels." He tapped the ledger. "One belonging to Mrs. Kelleher, under her maiden name, the other to an entity controlled by you, Mr. Cass." Cass tried for disdain, but his collar had begun to wilt. "Complete nonsense." "Irrefutable nonsense," Wolfe said. "Our Mr. Jantz here can attest that your late partner discovered irregularities." All eyes pivoted to Jantz. He swallowed. "It's true," he whispered. "Mr. Kellerman came to me. He'd found discrepancies in trade records. He said someone was bleeding the firm. He asked me to help him trace it. I warned him to be careful." "Did you tell him who was responsible?" Wolfe pressed. "I didn't know for sure," Jantz said, "but the trail led toward off-book accounts linked to Cass and a female alias." His gaze darted toward Vera and then dropped, guilt fighting terror. Vera laughed, short, sharp, and about as warm as an ice pick. "This is absurd. You're taking the word of an accountant who jumps at his own shadow." "It's more than his word," I said. I held up a photostat. "We've got copies of the relevant pages, and some of these entries were typed. Our friendly neighborhood typewriter expert," I tipped my head toward Wolfe, "has noticed that the spacing flaw in those entries matches the payoff note left at the murder scene." Kramer grunted. "Cass's office machine," he said. "We checked. Same defect." Cass's composure cracked a little more. "Anyone could have used my typewriter." "Indeed," Wolfe agreed, "and we shall consider that generous possibility. However, the totality of circumstance constrains my charity. Let us proceed chronologically." He shifted his attention to Saul. "You accepted an assignment to tail Mr. Cass for a client whose identity you did not fully verify." Saul nodded once. "I vetted what I could. The man used a false name. The fee was generous." "And I," Wolfe said grimly, Allowed it. That was my error. You discovered nothing alarming at the time. Routine movements, Saul said. Meetings, office, lunches. Then one evening, Cass met with someone in a hotel lounge. I didn't identify her clearly. Dark hair, slim, moved like she'd been born in expensive shoes. Vera's lips thinned. Shortly thereafter, Wolfe went on, Mr. Kellerman realized he had stumbled upon fraud. He became a liability. Mr. Cass and Mrs. Kelleher needed two things, to silence him and to divert suspicion. I stepped in. Enter Saul, discreet, connected, and conveniently already linked to Cass by that tail job. If he ever turned around and realized what was going on, he'd be dangerous to them. So, Wolfe said, they turned that potential threat into a scapegoat. They acquired Mr. Panzer's fingerprints by obtaining a glass from the hallway of his building with the cooperation of gravity and inattention. Mrs. Kelleher visited his address. Our superintendent observed her silhouette and manner. She left fingerprints of her own, which could be wiped away after the necessary transfer. Saul spoke up, tone dry. I do remember a glass missing from the hall table now that you mention it. I thought the building help had broken it. Convenient assumption, I said. You were being prepped for the role of fall guy. Then, Wolfe continued, Mr. Cass composed the payoff note on his defective office typewriter, planting the idea of a clandestine meeting. The broker's card bearing Saul's handwriting was stolen from a previous legitimate transaction. At the brokerage, Mr. Kellerman was killed with a paperweight. Saul's prints were transferred to it. The note and the card were left. An anonymous call from a payphone manipulated the time of contact to place Saul near the scene, thanks to an operator log that was later falsified. Kramer grunted again. We confirmed that. The call came later. Someone cooked the record. Mr. Brill, Wolfe said, shifting focus, discovered more than was healthy about the siphoning and their alliance. His panic was observed by Mrs. Kelleher, who betrayed that knowledge before she officially could have had it. When Mr. Brill attempted to flee, he was intercepted and killed. Again, a token belonging to Mr. Panzer, a flat cap, was left to reinforce the narrative. That cap was new, I put in. Saul's real one was in his closet. Nice touch, but overplayed. You'd have done better with a monogrammed handkerchief. Those are trendy among frame-up artists this season. Cass exploded. This is insane. You're spinning fairy tales. Wolfe's voice cut through the air. Mr. Cass, you will restrain yourself. I have had a trying week. He shifted slightly, and the chair creaked. Your fraud is documented. Your liaison with Mrs. Kelleher is documented. Your typewriter condemns you. Your beneficiary accounts condemn you. And your behavior, your anxious haste to guide suspicion toward Mr. Panzer, condemns you further. Vera lifted her chin. Even if any of that were true, you can't prove I did anything. My husband handled his own business. I have been a victim. Wolfe turned to her with a look I'd seen him reserve for overcooked lamb. Madam, avarice wearing silk does not cease to be avarice. You concealed your maiden name to facilitate theft. You profited. You knew of Mr. Brill's fear before authorities informed you. You placed yourself near Mr. Panzer's home under false pretenses. You have lied consistently. A jury may yet be charmed by your presentation. I am not. She sprang to her feet, eyes blazing. You pompous— Sit down, Kramer said quietly. Something in his tone did what logic hadn't. She sat. Wolfe drew a breath. Inspector, I submit that Mr. Cass and Mrs. Kelleher conspired to defraud their firm and eliminate those who threatened exposure. They exploited Mr. Panzer as a decoy, assuming that his association with me would make the police more eager, not less, to pursue him. He eyed Kramer. They miscalculated your integrity. For a second, even the radiator shut up. Kramer's jaw worked. He looked at Cass, then at Vera, then at Saul. Stebbins, he said. Read them their rights. Pearlie stepped forward, face carved from granite. As he began reciting the familiar litany, Cass sagged, the fight leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. Vera remained upright, but the glitter in her eyes had turned hard and flat. When Pearlie finished, Kramer moved closer to Wolfe's desk. We'll want that ledger and your notes. You will receive photostats, Wolfe replied. The originals stay here until I'm certain no further chicanery will occur. Kramer's mouth twitched. You saved us a week of man-hours, he said gruffly. Wolfe sniffed. "You would have managed eventually. I merely expedited the process to preserve Mr. Panzer's liberty and my temper." Kramer gave a curt nod. "Fair enough." He turned to Saul. "Panzer, you're clear, for now. Don't leave town." Saul's lips quirked faintly. "You know I don't go far," he said. I couldn't resist. I looked at Cass. "Next time you cook up a frame, pick a patsy who doesn't alphabetize his socks. Saul's too tidy to be your full guy." No one laughed, but I felt better. Kramer signaled to Stebbins, and they shepherded Cass and Vera out, the uniforms falling in behind them. Jantz hovered uncertainly until Wolfe said, "Mr. Jantz, you will make a full, honest statement at the precinct. It will serve you well." Jantz nodded frantically and scurried after the procession like a scared mouse fleeing a collapsing pantry. The door closed. Silence settled, heavy but finally clean. For the first time that week, Wolfe's shoulders eased. He looked at Saul. "I am relieved, Saul," he said, and there was no mistaking the warmth. "Sit, eat." Right on cue, Fritz appeared in the doorway, eyes shining, carrying a smaller tray now laden with sandwiches and a plate of something that smelled like victory glazed in butter. Saul stood, then hesitated. "Thank you," he said simply. Wolfe waved a hand. "Phooey, you were never in real danger." I snorted. "No, not at all. Just a murder charge, a public smear, and a frame fit to hang in a museum." Wolfe turned a chilly eye on me. "Archie, must you?" "Yes," I said. "It's in my contract." His lips twitched. Just a fraction. I moved to join Saul at the tray. The smell did things to my resolve that philosophy never could. As I reached for a sandwich, I glanced back at Wolfe, settled at his desk among his papers, finally, temporarily satisfied. The storm had broken. The tribunal was over. Saul was free, the killers were on their way downtown, and for the moment, the brownstone was just a house again. A house with good food, strong coffee, and one very large man who had just kept his family intact. I decided I could live with that. The brownstone had that particular kind of quiet that only arrives after a storm, thick, satisfied, and mildly smug about outliving the competition. I've heard people say a house can't have emotions, but those people have never lived with Nero Wolfe. By 9:30 that morning, with the case finally trussed, roasted, and delivered into the judicial oven, the whole building seemed to sigh and settle its shoulders like a heavyweight who'd gone 12 rounds and remembered he liked his chair better than the ring. Saul Panzer sat opposite Wolfe in the office, cupping a bowl of Fritz's hot broth in both hands. The steam curled around his face, softening the week-old strain etched there. He still looked worn, like a violin that had been played too hard by clumsy hands, but at least the tension that had strung every part of him taut had finally eased. When Saul relaxes, it's never with the drama most men bring to the act. He simply stops holding his breath. "I don't recommend custody as a vacation," Saul said mildly. "Not enough entertainment." "Entertainers," I offered, "are rarely booked for police detention. You'd have to request them in advance." Saul smiled at me over the bowl. It wasn't the usual Saul Panzer smile, quiet, confident, a little too wise, but it had a shadow of it. "If I ever send you a postcard from there, you'll know I've lost my edge." Wolfe made a sound halfway between a grunt and a harumph. For him, that was a warm expression of affection. "You will not be returning to custody," he said firmly. "Once is more than enough." Saul lowered the bowl. "I'm free because of your work, yours and Archie's." "My work," Wolfe said, "was necessitated by your restraint in accepting an assignment from a false client. I bear responsibility too." The remark hit with more force than any accusation could have. Saul blinked. "You don't owe me." "I do not debate my own statements," Wolfe snapped. Then more softly, "You will remain here for a week. Fritz will prepare proper meals. You require rest." Saul opened his mouth, considered arguing, and wisely didn't. "Thank you," he said simply. Wolfe inclined his head, the closest he gets to "you're welcome," unless pressed by a diplomat or Fritz's soufflé. The broth vanished a few sips later. Saul set the bowl aside and leaned back, eyes drifting shut for the first time since his arrest. He wouldn't have fallen asleep in Wolfe's office. No one does unless they're suicidal. But he let the chair support him, and that was its own kind of trust. The phone rang at 9:48, slicing the quiet like a cleaver hitting bone. I pivoted to grab it. Nero Wolfe's residence, I said. Kramer's voice growled through. Not angry growling, just his standard setting. Goodwin? Put me on with Wolfe. Hold the line and I'll patch you through, I said sweetly. Should I ask Fritz to bring you some coffee, or will the scent through the receiver suffice? Just put him on. I did. Wolfe leaned toward the phone like a mountain giving audience to a breeze. Yes? It's done, Kramer said. The DA's office has Cass and the widow in airtight charges. Fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, 2 counts of murder. They're caged, Wolfe. They won't squirm out. Good, Wolfe said. And Goodwin? Yes? I leaned closer to catch whatever miracle was coming. Good work, Kramer said grudgingly. I won't lie, my eyebrows hit the ceiling. Inspector, if you butter me up like that, I'll expect a Christmas gift this year. Don't push it, he said, and hung up. Wolfe let the receiver fall back onto its cradle. Archie, you are insufferable. Only in moments of triumph, I said. And Tuesdays. Fritz appeared in the doorway, hovering the way only Fritz can, quiet, respectful, but with the force of an impending meal. Broth has been finished, yes? Mr. Panzer, there is more if you like. Saul shook his head. Thank you, Fritz. It was just right. Fritz's chest swelled an inch. Dinner tonight will be light but restorative. I have a recipe in mind. Mr. Wolfe, shall I inform you of the menu? Wolfe waved a hand. Later, see that Mr. Panzer is settled in the guest room. Fritz bowed and beckoned gently. Saul rose, gave me a nod, and followed him out. His steps were slow but unburdened. It was the first time in days I'd seen him walk without the invisible weight of suspicion draped across his shoulders. The door closed behind them. The office fell into the familiar routine hum, the air thick with books, dust motes drifting like lazy detectives, and Wolfe's disapproval of wasted silence. I crossed to the filing cabinet and pulled a glass bottle from the small shelf above it. Milk. My second and final legal indulgence for the story. I poured half a glass and took a sip. Creamy, cold, perfect. Wolfe frowned. Must you? Yes, I said. It's medicinal. Doctor's orders. What doctor? Dr. Archie. I took another sip. A renowned expert. He let out a quiet pfui, which pleased me more than the milk. I settled onto the red chair. We should install a revolving door, you know, for suspects, police, blackmailers, clients who faint, and whoever else tries to frame us next. No, Wolfe shifted. If such a device existed, it would be abused. I refuse to encourage guests. You refuse to encourage most things, I said. Conversation, movement, outside air. He ignored that. Archie, do stop prattling. My prattling solved the case, I reminded him. Your prattling, he said, aggravated the guilty, distracted the innocent, and thereby yielded useful information. There is a distinction. Then I'll keep it up. No, he sighed, but I suppose it cannot be helped. For Wolfe, that was practically affection. A sunlight shaft crept across the rug, landing near the foot of Wolfe's desk. The orchids would be awaiting him soon. It was nearly the hour. Their routine, like gravity and taxes, operated whether murders happened or not. He looked toward the elevator. I will attend the orchids. And I'll update the case file, I said. Though frankly, I think the DA should send us fruit baskets for saving them paperwork. They will not, Wolfe said. Government appreciation is a myth. Spoken like a man who's fought them. I did not fight them, he corrected. I endured them. I set down the milk and pulled out the typewriter. The keys glinted like small metallic teeth, eager for gossip. I fed a fresh sheet of paper, rolled it into place and typed the heading. Case file, Panzer Kellerman Cass Affair, closure. The rhythmic click-clack filled the room, steady as a metronome. As I typed, Wolfe rose, slowly like a great prehistoric creature deciding whether evolution was worth the trouble, and crossed to the elevator. He paused with his hand on the control panel. Archie. I looked up. They tried to drag Saul away from me. His voice was low, controlled, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. From us. I know. Ensure it does not happen again. I'll do what I can, I said, but people with greed and bad ideas tend to be persistent. Then we must be more so. The elevator doors slid shut, and the machinery hummed as Wolfe ascended to the plant rooms. Orchids awaited him, hundreds of delicate, pampered blooms. He'd tend them with the same rigid tenderness he offered the people under his roof. Wolfe's version of affection was conducted in rituals: food, order, orchids, logic, and the occasional well-placed scold. I typed on. The brownstone breathed. Saul rested. Fritz plotted dinner like a general preparing a campaign. Wolfe communed with orchids, and I, Archie Goodwin, chronicled the whole circus. At 12:57, Fritz reappeared. "Lunch in 3 minutes," he announced. "All will dine together." "All?" I asked. "Mr. Panzer is a guest," Fritz said firmly. "He must eat." "Any idea what's on the menu?" "Simplicity," he said. "A restorative broth, fresh bread, charred endives, and a light roast." "That's simplicity?" "For Fritz Brenner," he said. "Yes." At 1 o'clock sharp, Wolfe descended, perfumed faintly with orchid air, and settled into his dining chair. Saul joined us, looking almost human again. I took my place. Fritz served with the serenity of a choir leader. We ate in companionable silence. Wolfe grunted approval between mouthfuls. Saul relaxed visibly. I enjoyed the rare feeling of victory without bruises. Even the roast behaved. When the plates were cleared and Fritz retreated, the quiet returned. A warm quiet, the kind that fills the brownstone after truth has done its job. I leaned back. "They forgot one thing, you know," I said. Wolfe arched a brow. Nobody gets between Nero Wolfe and his own. His eyes softened, just a little. "Indeed." And that was that. The storm was over, the brownstone held, and Saul Panzer, alive and free, was home.